episode of A San Francisco Conservative, a new podcast series named in honor of my friend David Parker's new book, A San Francisco Conservative. And David himself is, you'll never guess, a San Francisco conservative. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So a lot of the topics you talk about in your two books, that you write about in your two books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, really seem to be surfacing in the news. It's almost like you had a crystal ball or something like that, right? You one of the key things that you write about is the importance of the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and we've learned that I guess someone leaked and the reports or the conclusion of the U.S. Supreme Court as far as their thoughts on Roe versus Wade. That's been part of public policy for 50 years. And according to the decision that's been leaked, a change is going to come. What are your thoughts as far as checks and balances, the Supreme Court, and whether we need to really adhere to the Constitution or whether that evolves? I'd love to hear what you think.
That leak is almost a symptom of what's wrong in this country. The Supreme Court is looking like it's a partisan organization, just like the political parties. It doesn't stand for anything. And that's what the whole split in this nation, red and blue, is really about, even if people aren't quite saying it. It's literal interpretation of the Constitution. That's what a conservative, classical liberal, that's who I am. Or a progressive interpretation of the Constitution. We're moving on from what the founding fathers gave us, and that's the split. And the Supreme Court is from time to time is right in the middle of that. And in one sense, it's being asked to decide something that nobody ever intended for the Supreme Court to decide, because there's the founding fathers existed in the 1700s. That's before Darwin, it's before modern science. And the purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. It sounds like the Supreme Court should be protecting life, that there shouldn't be abortion. But if the nation is 50-50 split on that issue, even 50-50 split, is there a God or not, then maybe the Supreme Court shouldn't be deciding this decision and making any decision on this. We're a democracy, but we're not just a democracy. A democracy means that 51% of the nation can tell 49% what to do. We're a constitutional democracy. You can't do something that's illegal. So you could say, well, murder is illegal, so we can't have abortion. It's murder. And but since that's not so clear, the science is not so clear, we shouldn't be deciding it. Supreme Court should not be making a decision on this whatsoever. That's the split in this nation.
So if 51% of American voters or American citizens think we should bring back slavery, can the Supreme Court uphold that? Well, that's a majority decision.
Right, that's what we're not. John Adams said it really clearly a number of times. We're a nation of laws. We're not a nation of men. We don't just do what the majority at any moment feels like doing. That's called the tyranny of the majority. You can just step over half the nation because, we're in the majority, so that's how it goes. That's a democracy, but we're a constitutional democracy. You can't just legislate something that's illegal. And that's what it means to stick to a constitution. The Constitution is one page. It's how to create a representative government, executive branch, the legislative branch, Congress, judiciary. It's very simple, and the government can do a few things, and that's about all. And people are on their own. Revolutionary War was fought to create a country where people are on their own.
You in your two books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, which everyone should pick up. I highly recommend both books, of course. You write a lot about freedom, freedom of entrepreneurs, and we talk about immigrants coming to this country in search of freedom, and with reference to what it sounds like, the Supreme Court is going to be telling us. Is that really freedom? It doesn't sound like freedom to me.
Well, throughout the history of the United States, if you want to put it into 2 words, freedom and opportunity. People are coming because the countries they're coming from don't have that. And people make a big effort to leave their culture, their country, their friends, their childhood friends, their family, because their desire for freedom and opportunity outweigh, and they make a huge effort to come here, and they often die along the way. So we should uphold that. If government steps in and starts helping us, that starts to sound like the country they just came from, because government can't help us. Problems we have are really personal. Did you get up in the morning and go to work? Yes or no? And if someone doesn't like you, then don't associate with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, again, I keep coming back to that very important word, freedom, which for me is what, this nation is all about. You've written about, people having compassion. We say sometimes the progressives or the romantic liberals say, you conservatives have no compassion. You don't care about homelessness. You don't care about, integrated schools and that kind of thing. And you've reminded us, no, being a conservative or, I'll let you put it in context there, but what are your thoughts about that?
Well, compassion is an important ingredient in life. And I'm not a religious person, but religious people would like to think of themselves as being compassionate, and conservatives are often religious. So you can't say a conservative isn't compassionate. And anyway, the compassion and reason, I'm Apollo, I think I'm reason, both are necessary in life. The Shiva, the god of India, has 4 arms on one hand, and on this hand, and on this hand, and on this hand. There's more than one way of looking at the world, and all of them have to be combined. That's what intelligence is, the ability to combine opposing ideas and function at the same. That's what Zen Buddhism is, reconciliation of opposites. So all this is important. So it's almost a non-issue. You can't. All right, homelessness, for example. Governor Newsom in California was elected. He says, I'm going to solve that problem. Once he got elected, he says, I'm a shoo-in for the next election. I don't have to do a single thing. So I'm not. So what kind of progressivism is that? Runs on solving a problem, then realizes he has a majority of the vote. He doesn't have to solve the problem. It hasn't been solved. He's done nothing to solve the problem. That's progressivism, just talk.
Yeah, no, it's reason to wonder, that's for sure. You give entrepreneurs, and I think really, every human being, a lot of credit, credit for being able to make our own decisions, for accept responsibility in our own lives and so on, rather than having the government swoop in and rescue us for something. How does this recent news from the Supreme Court, as far as, reversing Roe versus Wade, fit into that idea that, we all really are capable of making our own decisions, and we do care about the quality of our society and values,
Well, that's one, but we're a constitutional democracy. You can't just vote for something just because everybody wants it at any particular point. 80% of the population may want something, but if it's not constitutional, you can't have it. But if the Supreme Court cannot resolve a problem, or the Constitution has no answer to the problem, it shouldn't be voted on. There are people who believe that Darwin and science have a lot to say, and that maybe a life is not quite a life during its first 30 days as an egg. It's not a human being that we recognize. And if we can't decide that, we shouldn't be deciding it. It's a personal decision.
And again, I'll just remind everyone you're listening to the latest episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring author David Parker, author of Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. And I don't know if this might be shifting gears a little bit, but again, thinking about this news from the Supreme Court makes me wonder what responsibility does an elected representative have? I was going to say a politician, but maybe the politician will do anything to get elected. But being elected, you would think they would represent their voters. Certainly, as people are engaged in primaries now, and we're headed, towards the midterm election in November, a lot of people are talking about, how the latest presidential election was stolen and so on. Even people who came out and said, no, of course it wasn't stolen. The next day they're saying, yes, it was stolen. Are elected representatives like that really serving the people?
Politicians have a real function. It's to bring the two sides that I'm talking about, liberal, conservative, together to resolve an issue. You need a politician, especially when things aren't so clear. And each side gives a little bit. Historically, that's been our great strength. Both sides have agreed to come together, and at one point in time, one side is in power, but then 4 or 5 years later, the other side is in power. That's perfectly normal. That's the politician's job. But when we're asking government to do so much, then the politicians are in a position of being able to hand out this and hand out that, and they become powerful over and beyond what a politician should be powerful. One reason I'm writing also is to tell progressives that when you ask government to step in and help, you must tell all the voters that it's the working middle class that are paying for everything. You're not taxing the rich to help the poor. You're taxing the middle class to help the poor. And if the middle class know that, which is most of the nation, they may not want to vote for all high regulation of business, high taxes. It's just a burden on the middle class. The rich are not complaining. When they see Cortez walk into the Museum of Modern Art with a tax the rich in blood on her dress, they're laughing. You can't tax the rich. It's just not possible.
Yeah. And what's your opinion of the effectiveness of Congress right now? Not long ago they had the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the host, Trevor Noah, the comedian, the talk show host, said, "It's an honor to be here with the most powerful man in the world, Joe Manchin. Good to see you." And it's like, it seems like we've drawn to a standstill. They also recently had a memorial service. Former Vice President Walter Mondale passed away last year. They were finally having a memorial service. And they said, this is like getting back to the days when, when he was in the Senate and so on, when people would meet, for a drink after work or something, but they would work things out. They would become friends. But now it just seems, you hear Mitch McConnell say, I don't care, who they nominate for the next Supreme Court justice. The next time there's a vacancy, we're not budging. That was certainly what happened during, the Obama years and so on. What do you make of the effectiveness of our government?
In one way, that it was created so it couldn't do anything. That was one of the thoughts behind our Constitution, that we shouldn't be asking the government, because we shouldn't be asking the government to do things for us. And we've been asking it to do more and more since 1933, that the nation begins to think that government is our solution to our problems, and it's finding out that maybe it's the cause of our problems, that we shouldn't be asking politicians to solve our problems. Yeah. Almost all problems are personal. I mean, we have things that are wrong, like discrimination, but then people who are discriminated have to go around it until all of a sudden that discrimination starts to die down on its own. But you can't, ultimately problems are personal.
And would you say, or, at the start of this conversation, we're talking about how we are a constitutional democracy. It sounds like we all have fundamental rights, human rights that, I don't know if that's a contradiction, that all problems are personal, but we need to keep our human rights in mind. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, we have the Constitution for that purpose. We have the Bill of Rights, and we've had some very good legislation, civil rights legislation after the Civil War and in the 1960s. That's it. Yeah, you can't. Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass and many people have said, all we're asking for is equality before the law. We're not asking government to hand out money or do this or that as a preferential treatment. Frederick Douglass wouldn't have gone for preferential treatment. He actually said that after the Civil War, he didn't want social workers coming around and trying to help, help the blacks who are kind of bridging out of slavery. Since we've been living in this country for 250 years, we know exactly what we do. Those who are going to go to school will go to school. Those who won't. And that's it. Don't underestimate what we can do. That's a very strong statement. That's a libertarian statement. And the government is trying to do too much. Right. So it's just ripe for corruption. People have left countries to get away from that. Government's doing things for them.
Right. Well, very, very profound thought from Frederick Douglass. I think that's a great note to close on. It's been a great conversation once again. Thank you. And I really want to encourage people to pick up copies of Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, David's two excellent books. You can do that on his website, davidparkeressays.com, or by going to amazon.com. So thanks, David. Look forward to catching you again soon.
Okay, you will.